Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Morney, and joining me on the line, as always, Mr. Ethan Bewildering Blizzard Sachs. Ethan, you might
Ooh.
understand this format, but it has been it has been bewildering to me up until about 24 hours ago.
And then all became clear.
I don't know if all's clear, but the blizzard's starting to turn into just a normal snow. The sun's starting to come out, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, nothing shakes your confidence as a content creator like starting off on the wrong foot in a format.
Well, and so to be clear for the listeners who haven't watched my stream and seen me horrifically depressed online live, I just keep losing over and over, and not recently. Like, I figured some things out and turned things around in the last 24 hours, and I think I have helpful advice for people who may be also bewildered by this format. But the thing that's rough is, like, I knew my card evals were right for the most part. Like,
Yeah.
I think but missing on like 5 to 10 cards was enough to really throw off some things about deck construction then also, I think, for me. So I don't know. I've done a lot of reflecting on drafting, and I am curious to pick your brain about it as we help listeners with this format.
Yeah, I did not feel like I struggled as much, though. I will say, as one of my notes in sort of my broad overview is, like, my 17 lands is real feast or famine. Like, it's like trophy, 03, 1/3, trophy, 03, 1/3. Like, not a lot of like 4/3s and 6/3s in there. There's just a lot of like all good or all bad. And I think a part of that is that the drafting portion of this format for me is by far the most interesting and the most, like, where the most equity is gained, where you can make the most mistakes, or at least that has been what I have found. And like, I get myself trapped because so much feels possible that I'm like, I'm going to push down this path. And it's like, no, that was a wrong idea for this draft. And now you have ended up with a pile of garbage. That has been my experience. But I'm very excited to chat with you week one to sort of check in on our early access takes, where we think has aged well, what we think has perhaps aged like milk in the hot sun, and just dive into some really big picture things that have emerged from week one of the format, not only with us getting to draft, but all of our listeners as well. So before we get into all that stuff, let's do some housekeeping and then we'll dive right in. Let's chat about the Patreon. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. We have been getting a lot of love via the Patreon over the past week, which is super awesome to see. We're going to be welcoming a ton of new folks in this week, and we've also had a lot of folks jumping up some tiers as well to join us with Lords Unlimited every week, which is one of the bonus perks that you get at a certain tier on the Patreon page. You get access to not only this episode, a day early ad-free each week, but you also get access to a bonus mini episode. I'm sure this week we're just going to be doing a ton of draft log reviews. That's going to be awesome to get to do, just to dive deeper into the format. We like to talk about Lords Unlimited as continuing the conversation from the week, which is a really cool space to get to do more content for our most devoted listeners. And we've also got a great perk via the Patreon that everybody gets access to, which is the Lords of Limited Discord. I'm not usually as like dialed in to the format conversations week one in our Discord, but this week I've been really trying to like jump in, certainly checking in on the trophies, seeing what's winning, certainly checking in on people's updated ideas about individual cards and big picture stuff, just to sort of do some temperature checks of where folks are at versus what my experiences are. So the Discord is awesome. I love it. I feel like a proud parent with the Discord, but I also just think it's a great resource for our listeners and our patrons as well. And like I said, we're going to be welcoming in a whole mess of new folks to the Patreon this week. So this week we're welcoming Mardu, Andrew, Emery, Chris, Evan, Rohan, Jacob, Tyler, Anthony, Not That Maynard, Jake, Hans, Luna, Dak, and Tyler. Thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, cannot say thank you enough. I want to shout out one of these patrons, I assume, is Emery from the Discord, who has done some analysis and proven without a doubt that Ethan and I are at least around 85% accurate with our early format predictions. They were wondering, are these guys just shooting from the hip, or they really know what's up? And now we've got the cold hard facts, at least 85% accurate early in the format.
I feel like we would have to explain this further, but there's no time. So we'll just take it at that. The AI overlords and this dear patron have proven that our takes are 85% accurate, which feels extremely generous. Okay, speaking of,
that was my thought. I was like, normally I'm not about data, but I will take it. I'll take the W.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, I think a little bit of a catch-up corner here, just to touch base on last week. I think we got a lot of big picture things right, and we nailed the exhales mattering a ton. And then I think a lot of the individual card evaluations, like some cards we were super excited about, some cards we maybe had some hot takes about, looking at you, Snowmelt Stag, and Sibsig Appraiser, have not aged particularly well. But those were easier for me to adjust, and I didn't feel like my scope view of the format had to change that much.
Yeah, I almost reintroduced you this week as coming back for the second week in a row. You didn't
Snowmelt
Snowmelt
Stag.
Stag.
That's fair. Yeah.
uh, that card is not great, which it
No.
took me a little too long to adjust on because I had such a good experience with it in early access, and you did too separately. And
Mm-hmm.
usually I trust when we have those good experiences together separately. It also took me too long to course correct on Sibsig Appraiser.
Mm-hmm.
Without looking at the data. I didn't look at the data until this morning because I really do enjoy figuring things out for myself. Happy to report, like, I'm on team data this time around, largely with what it says. Like, I think I agree with almost everything that's there.
And
But
what do you mean when you say that? Because you're looking primarily at sorting by game and hand win rate and just like the top cards, right? You're not looking at like the deck color pair win rates, are you, or anything like
no,
that?
good
Okay.
lord, no. Yeah, I just
Okay.
felt, but sorted by game and hand win rate, and I was like, yeah, this checks out largely with my experience. I don't think there's anything wild there. But the other thing that was on 17 lands that was kind of cool that I perused a little bit. I don't know how long this feature has been there, but there was a like a draft metagame analysis where you could like filter by color and then common or uncommon or whatever and see the alpha of cards like in a chart. And you could
Oh,
see cards trending upwards or downwards. Like you could set a number of days. It was very interesting. I had not seen that feature before.
that's very cool. Yeah, I have not seen that. I'll have to check that out.
So as far as Sipsic Appraiser, I think easy to say that it's good without saying why. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand for this format is why the good cards are good, because you have to have a plan for what sort of a deck you want to build in the
Yes.
draft. I think that's extraordinarily important. Like just having card evals and knowing what cards are good is not going to lead to winning games. Like I am case in point of that. Like I have done a lot of losing. If you played me while I was hard stuck in silver, congratulations on all the free wins I was handing out. I'm now a proud platinum gamer after figuring things out the last 24 hours. But there was a while there where we were spending some serious time in silver. Sipsig Appraiser does a couple things. One, it plays to the board, which I think you're incentivized to do with most styles of decks in the format.
And just to be clear, we're saying this card a lot, but it is only week one. This is the 2 and a blue 2/1 common. When it enters, you look at the top two, put one in your hand and the other into your graveyard.
Yes. It helps you hit land drops. And if you do already have your land drops, it lets you filter lands you don't need away to find action. Like it lets you either
Mm-hmm.
find action or lands, which is very valuable. And yes, like the criticism we had against it that the body is largely irrelevant, I think that still holds, but not nearly enough to
Mm-hmm.
not make it a good card. And sometimes the body
Correct.
is relevant, and when the body is relevant, it's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that it does also is it's below 4 mana value on the curve. Like one of the things, the last time I felt this way about a format, which was like, I just can't win, I don't know what's good, was OG Dominaria. And I think this format and OG Dominaria have a
Mm.
lot of similarities in that, like, they're both largely higher power formats rather than high synergy formats. And like the good cards matter a ton. And there's a one of the things I was messing up in OG Dom, which is again one of the same things I was messing up here, I think, after doing some reflecting, is that your curve has some choke points. And if you load your curve up with things 4 mana value and higher, you just never get to double spell. Like it's really hard to get to 8 mana. Not that you can't get to 8 mana in this format, you definitely can. But by the time you get there, it's often double spelling is often too late to catch you up if you were
Mm-hmm.
behind. So Sipsig Appraiser being 3 mana value or less and a premium card at 3 mana value or less is really good. Like that's I think the biggest single adjustment I made is shoving my curve 3 mana value or less and being really particular about the cards 4 mana value and higher, and oftentimes trying to skip the 4 mana value slot.
I want to just clarify a point you made that I totally agree with, which is that the good cards matter a ton, because I think on face value, that is a statement that just sounds sort of obvious, like, oh, the good cards are good. Thanks for telling us that. But what Ben is saying is that the gap is big in this format. Between there's like the cards that matter, the cards that really affect games, gap the rest. And that's something to clarify in terms of like card evaluations, identifying things, how you're building decks, why we think it's a power versus a synergy format. All of that stuff is wrapped up in that sentiment.
Yes, for sure. Although I am kind of coming around to it being a synergistic format, but not in a classical synergistic sense. Like that's another thing I've been doing some reflecting on, just for
Okay.
broader stuff here, which is, for example, in Ether Drift, like immediately the artifact deck, like I see, okay, this deck wants you to draft artifacts. There's payoffs like Haunt the Network for drafting artifacts, and you can build a deck that is more than the sum of its parts. And I think there are ways to do that here. It's just not quite that type of synergy. It's synergy through having a very focused game plan.
Yeah, I have that bullet point a little later on in the show notes. Is that the amendment I would make to us saying it's not a synergy format is that I think the synergy in the format is streamlined. Like the power you get from greater than the sum of its parts is not wrapped up in I built a flurry deck or I built a mobilized deck. It's I built a deck with a streamlined plan, whether that's white board presence or black green mid range counters, whatever that is. It can exist, but I don't think it's about like artifact mattering or max speed like it was in Ether Drift.
For sure. And I do think the best version of that is aggro beatdown. Like that's almost like the synergy deck of the format to me. And it's not even really that synergistic. But the thing that's weird or that was so hard for me to draft about aggro that I'm fine with now is I had in my head that the format was a high power level format. It was so hard for me to make myself pick a card like Shock Brigade, for example, which is the 1 red 1/3 menace that has mobilize
Mobilize
1. So it
one.
makes a 1/1 attacker when you attack with it. That card is intrinsically underpowered compared to something like Krakik Guardian, the 3 in a teamer, 6/5 flying, hexproof vigilance, trample dragon that has hexproof until it does damage. But there's different things those cards are asking of you. And if you put Shock Brigade in the right home, which is something I'm so keen to do with cards that are like, artifacts win the game or whatever, that Shock Brigade is similarly powerful if you surround it by the right cards in this format. I am fully aggro pilled in the format for what it's worth. Like currently, that's what I think is the best, most consistent option for winning.
So there's a very interesting thing happening in this format right now, which is that there are decidedly two camps, I would say. There are people who are like, all I'm drafting is Mardu and I haven't touched Temur. And there are people who are all I'm drafting is Temur and I haven't touched Mardu. And you can see it in the discourse in our Discord. You can see it in people posting trophies like haven't lost with Mardu yet, 3 in a row. You've got Samp who's like haven't touched Boros yet with a 10-foot pole. All I'm doing is building ramp control decks. And like they both exist and they're both good. For what it's worth, I think I am still Camp Temur is better than Camp Mardu, but I see the Mardu stuff. I think Shock Brigade is a really good point and one of our big misses from last week, when we were going through our notable commons list and saying there's not a single aggro card on there. I had even had an inkling of and faced Shock Brigade and found it to be difficult. Shock Brigade is an excellent common. It should absolutely be on our notable commons list. It is one of the best tools for assertive decks, but also those assertive decks they don't have to be all in Boros aggro, though they can be. There are flavors of Mardu mid-range. I had this cool Rakdos sacrifice deck that I drafted yesterday that was awesome and trophied, but there are different flavors of things. I think at its core, it's Boros aggro, but those seem to be the two camps that exist when talking to people about the format after 1 week.
Yes, I agree. And I'm excited to get into why I think aggro is a little bit better, but also want to see what you're doing with the later game decks or with the Temur life, because I have been in every camp. Like I've tried it all and lost with almost everything except Boros aggro. Like that's been very consistently premiumly good for me.
Right. Well, I had a sort of reverse experience where my first trophy was straight red-white aggro, actually Boros. And my next trophy was more Mardu mid-range. And my Temur decks were doing 4-3, 1-3, 4-3, whatever. And then I started to make a mental shift. And I think we'll get to that when we talk about what I see as the 4 buckets of decks in the format.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Magic players love stats, so let's talk numbers. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up fast, but with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save, on average, up to 50% per session.
With BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, saving you big on cost, like when the stonks are up in the arena store and there's a draft token on sale. Such value.
Therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury. With online therapy, you get quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to everyday stress.
It's also nice to have a confidant to talk to, bounce ideas off of, and problem solve with. Your mental health is worth it, and now it's within reach.
With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally.
It's convenient too. You can join a session with the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life.
Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/lords to get 10% off your first month.
That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lords. And now, back to the show. So, the first one, talking about aggro, I think, is white board presence-based decks. These are mostly Boros or Mardu. They play to the board. They are the most aggressive deck in the format. But I think there's a range there. I think it can be super all-out aggro where you're playing Mardu Devotee on 1, Shock Brigade on 2, curving out, go wide payoffs, whatever. But I think it's also what we talked about last week of what this deck does the best is plays a bunch of creatures that your opponent doesn't want to use their exhale removal on. It's like, am I really I don't want to pick off their Mardu Devotee. I don't want to pick up their Shock Brigade. I want to save this for something better. It's like, no, these are the things you have to kill or they're going to kill you.
Yeah, I almost think more than, white is certainly there. You can also be base red. I think more than base white too. There's really good base red aggro cards.
But you're never doing base red pairing it with blue, or I guess I should say rarely. The thing about this format that's very interesting and why I think the drafts are the most interesting part is you can end up in sort of the niche decks or the offshoot or the rare decks feel like they're coming up more than they should. Like this Rakdos deck I drafted, I had this weird one where I got 2 of the Is It Siege cards. And so I was able to build actual blue-red tempo aggro, but that's not going to happen that much, but maybe it is going to happen more than I think. I don't know.
That's kind of my take right now. I feel like more than drafting, this is kind of hot takey or very, I don't know, out there. But like I said, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, a lot of draft philosophizing because I was losing and trying to figure out why. And I almost think in this format, you're more incentivized to try to draft a style of deck than you are incentivized to try to draft colors.
Yes.
You were talking about I don't see color or whatever. That was your take last week. I'm kind of on board. Just sitting down and, okay, the best card in this pack is an aggressive card. I'm going to try to pair that with other aggressive cards. Or, okay, the best card in my first pack was an aggressive card. The second pack, it's a really good control payoff. I'm going to figure out, do I see more aggressive cards or do I see more control cards? Because the colors will generally work themselves out, is what I've found. Now that I've been trying to draft a style of deck more than I've been trying to draft a clan or a color pair per se.
Yes, I agree with that, which is why 2 of my next 3 buckets are the same base color. I just think they're doing 2 very different things. So the one deck, which I really haven't had much experience with, is green mid-range. But if you look through our trophy list in the Discord, there's lots of people having success with base black-green Abzan mid-range decks, where they're playing to the board on 2, 3, 4, got a little bit more play to them, but they're not quite as hyper aggro as I think the white board presence decks are. And this can be base blue-green in Abzan, base blue-green in Sultai, and I think also green-based Temur decks, which leads me to perhaps my biggest revelation this week was I was like, oh, I still really like blue and green as the best colors, but blue and green actually don't play very well together in the format. And that was a shift for me of okay, if I'm drafting Temur, am I base blue or am I base green? Because green really wants to play to the board and blue really wants to hold up mana. And I think a lot of my 0-3 decks were decks where I was like, I'm playing Inoc Wayfarer and Dispelling Exhale in the same deck.
Yeah.
And then I get into these awkward turns where I'm like, am I supposed to tap out? okay, I'll tap out this turn. And then they're like, here's a dragon. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, cool, I lose. Like, and that was one of the other things I was like, I think one of the reasons I was struggling, I noticed this happening, is like playing blue decks in the format, I think, is one of the hardest things to do. Not only in terms of drafting, like knowing which pieces to pick when, knowing how to build your deck. Am I playing 2 copies of this counter? Do I want 2 copies of the draw 3 or 3 copies of a draw 3? Whatever. Do I need ways to not deck? And then in game, those blue control decks also present you with these decision points that the whole game hinges on. If you tap out at the wrong time, if you counter the wrong thing, you lose those games. And so those decks really sit on a knife's edge a lot of the time that some of the other decks don't. So anyway, back to the buckets. We've got whiteboard presence, green mid-range, versus green ramp, which are the soup decks of the format. These sort of go big, ramp, fix your mana, play the best cards you see, and go over the top of your opponents.
Yeah, I like those buckets. Like I said, I would add red there. Look, the color that's missing is black, which
Yes.
I think is the worst color in the format. If we're talking that way about the format, personally, I still don't feel confident enough. Like, this is the least broadly overarching format picture I have of a format, largely because I've been so lost, but I do think I would have black in last place as far as colors right now.
Yeah, I just don't think, I mean, like I said, looking through the Discord trophies, largely, the only black-based trophy decks are green-black Abzan decks.
And those are more green than black, yeah.
And those are more green than black, I think. They're more defined by what the power of the green is bringing, and then black brings maybe some good gold cards, and obviously some good removal, Caustic Exhale, still playing a nice role in the format, but I agree with you. Largely, I think black is in last.
So I agree with your half and half things as far as blue and green. I think I've gotten myself into some trouble there. I've also drafted what I think are good blue control decks that have struggled for a couple reasons. Sometimes they have just atrocious matchups against the green ramp decks because your hand is full of the removal you drafted, because you have to draft removal in your blue control decks, and they don't play a creature until like turn 5 or turn 6. Like, their turn 3 play is the green ramp spell that searches up a land, or it's Dragonstorm Globe, the artifact that taps for 1 of any color. And then you do eventually, like, they play some stuff, but eventually you run out of juice, or your stuff doesn't line up quite right. And then you also can randomly get run over by red-white beatdown. Like, trying to account for aggro and ramp and other control decks and decks that just randomly can go over the top of you, it's asking a lot from a control deck to try to account for all that. And I think you need a really good reason to be trying to do that. But then I also, on the flip side, so I've drafted that deck several times, done very poorly with it several times. I think also largely getting unlucky along the way. Like, that's been the thing I've been struggling the most with. I do think I've been running bad too, but been losing enough that it was also a combination of me doing things wrong. And I think I've largely since course corrected on that. But the blue counter magic is so high in the data. And I think those cards are powerful. That's why I was playing those decks. Like, I was liking those cards. I just wasn't winning with them. So it is, in some senses, surprising to me that they're as high as they are, because of how hard I think it is to build and pilot a blue control deck.
I think it's a bit more, I see the format a bit more like a rock, paper, scissors. Like, if I separate out green mid-range, it really does feel like aggro, ramp, and control. And like, the ramp decks beat the aggro decks, the control decks beat the ramp decks, and the aggro decks beat the control decks, is largely how I see the format. And then there is green mid-range, but I think that's different than green ramp. And I think that's definitely a tier 2 strategy versus what I think green ramp and green soup is a tier 1 strategy. And I should say, as an asterisk, I think next week we'll dive, I think with green ramp, multicolor soup being such a big part of this format, that sort of being an evergreen style episode of like, how do you draft these decks? And it's such a pillar of this format. I think we'll do a deep dive on that style of deck next week. I'll give myself a little slap on the wrist for last week, because I think we just sort of shortcutted a lot about those decks. You know, my sort of glib comments about like, I don't see color, I'm just taking whatever and whatever fixing. Like, there's a lot that goes in there. And then again, circling back to why I think the drafts are so good or so interesting in the format, is like, when you take fixing, and is that fixing a Evolving Wilds or a dual land or a tri-land or a monument? And then, are you taking a 2-drop here? Are you taking a removal spell here? Do you have to take this bomb here? Like, that's all really tricky stuff to do by the seat of your pants if you aren't super entrenched in Magic and Limited. And so I think it's going to be worth really fleshing out next week.
Well, and even for somebody who is, like, I cannot tell you the first 4 days of this format, I was just lost. Like
Yeah.
every pack I would look at, I was like, I don't know what to take. I think this is a good card, but I keep losing with it. Like I think this is a good card, but I keep losing with it. Like, and then you start to get advice from other people that's flitting around in your head, and then you've got like
Yeah.
multiple cooks in the kitchen without there even being multiple cooks in the kitchen.
And because of the Camp Temur versus Camp Mardu of it all, those voices can be extremely tough to reconcile.
Yes, like very conflicting. I think another thing you were talking about lands that has shifted for me is I've kind of come around to I don't want to be picking lands unless I have a very good reason to be picking the land. Like if I start with a busted card and I'm planning to build a soup deck from the beginning, come what may, then I'll pick lands pretty highly. But otherwise, I really want to get the pieces of my deck and my deck's plan together before the lands.
I totally agree with that take because it's sort of the inverse of the conclusion we came to last week, but it's still rooted in the fixing is so abundant. So figure out your deck's plan first, and then you'll know what kind of fixing you need. Because if you end up Boros aggro, you won't need much fixing. You want one red white tap land maybe in your pool to cast your cards on curve. But if you're a soup deck or whatever, like today I drafted, because I really want to try and draft Abzan. So I first picked a Felithar, the Abzan 3/3 rare when it ETBs or attacks, sack a thing, and then if you do, you put a counter on everything. Picked that first, then took another Abzan card second. And so at that point I was like, okay, Sandstep Citadel I'm not passing a single one of those. I need that over anything else. And even Jungle Hollow or Blossoming Sands, like any of those lands that are in Abzan, I'm going to need to take above everything. But it wasn't until I'm on that path that I know I need to do that.
Right. The other thing that having the lands too high in your pick order, which I think they definitely were too high in my pick order, is that it leads to you drafting a multicolor mess deck that isn't powerful enough way
Yeah.
too often. Like you
Yep.
you really want to be at the top of the food chain. Like you want to be very confident that you're at the top or close to the top if you're doing that style of deck, because as I've found, there is always a bigger fish.
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of really big fish in this format.
And I don't think I stated it clearly when talking about blue control as what I feel like is the fourth bucket of the format, which is a base blue deck, likely blue-red with white for Jeskai, can be blue-red with just the good teamer cards like Mammoth Bellow, whatever. But I don't think your blue control decks basically cannot be base blue-green just because the two colors are doing such different things in the format.
Yeah, I like that.
So then zooming out a bit further, broader format thoughts. This definitely would be, if we could go back and have this be one of the 5 format truths, I would have this there. Missing land drops is terrible. Like, I am not cutting lands at all. I don't cut lands for Sagu Wildlings. I don't cut lands for monuments. The control decks, the ramp decks, and the aggro decks, they all have one thing in common, and that's they lose if they stumble.
I agree. So are you running 18 lands or are you still running 17 most of the time?
17 most of the time. I'm not like, even if I've got some ways to filter mana in Boros, like that doesn't make me cut lands. And certainly in my ramp decks or control decks, I'm not cutting lands.
Where are we at on the monuments? Can we get a pulse check on those?
Still really like them and have gained a newfound appreciation for the Mardu monument this week, because in the decks where in the Boros decks that want to, or I just don't think they're ever really Orzhov, but I guess they could be, but whatever. If you're base 2 color in Mardu aggro and you're wanting to touch a third color, the Mardu monument's just really good at letting you do that. And the 3/1/1s with haste and menace helps push some stuff. Plus, if you're drafting those decks correctly, as we'll talk about a little bit later on, I want to just do a sort of mini dive on those style of decks because I feel like we sort of poo-pooed them in the previous weeks. But the go wide payoffs are so important. Ways to mass pump your team, ways to pump a couple things, ways to sacrifice tokens, whatever. The Mardu Monument just does a lot in that deck, I think. But I'm still largely a fan of the monuments myself.
I've come lower on them because they don't do anything to the board, and then like the activations are so expensive that like it's rare that I found myself running out of things to do in the format. More, it's been finding a chokehold on my mana or a choking point on tempo. in the game. So I've not liked that they don't affect the board and also don't really help you double spell or anything like that.
I just think it's why Sig Appraiser has risen. The number one reasons I've wrapped my head around Sig Appraiser this week is I never want to miss land drops. And so I'm just like thrilled with a 3-mana play that ensures I'm going to hit my 4th land. To a lesser extent, Inoc Wayfarer. I'm still not as crazy about this card as perhaps the data suggests. The 1 and a green ETB 1/1. The 1 and a green 1/1 when it ETBs, you mill 3. You can pick a land from among them, put it into your hand. If not, you put a counter on it. But I think largely because I haven't drafted a lot of the green mid-range decks, I'm not crazy about this. Inoc Wayfarer is still pretty good in the green ramp decks, like just something to do on 2. But it is basically not board affecting as much as the monuments to me. Like it just does this. Wayfarer does a very similar thing of like, it's a 2-mana play, ensures I'm going to hit a land. Monuments do it even better because they fix as well. But yeah, just I'm still a pretty big fan of the monuments myself.
I think I like Inoc Wayfarer better than the monuments. That's not true for you?
I do not currently, no. The drafts, as I've said, I wonder if this is your take so far. The drafts are still, I think, the most interesting part of the format by far.
Broadly, I've not enjoyed it so far, but I've also lost a ton, so I'm sure that is coloring my opinion. The thing that I think about the drafts that's interesting is the thought I was talking about earlier. Like, now that I'm viewing it differently, where I'm thinking about, I'm not so worried about color, I'm worried about plan. Like, trying to gauge power level of cards in the various plans and trying to make sure that I end up in the right plan for my seat. I've been enjoying the drafts way more, although or at least I don't know that I've been enjoying them more. That has brought clarity to my drafts that has previously been lacking, and I like that feeling of clarity when I'm moving through a draft. So if you're struggling, I would encourage you to maybe try to think about things that way. The gameplay has been interesting at times, but it's also woefully uninteresting at times. Like, I can't tell you the number of times I've had a good control deck and my opponent has, like, I've played the game well and I've tapped out for, or they've tapped out for Jeskai Revelation, or they've tapped out for Inspired Ultimatum, both of which are the Jeskai spells that basically win you the game. And I counter it. And I'm like, great, cool. Counter their thing, I win. And then I still have another counter spell, and they loop it back with the stupid Jeskai 2/3. And I counter it the second time. And then they play another one, and it resolves the third. Like, there's so much big end game that some of the games are like predetermined if you flip over the decks, or it's determined by the game's going longer and you both have a couple bombs, and it's whoever hits their card first and sticks it. Like, I don't know. So I have mixed feelings about both. Like, sometimes it's been really good, and sometimes it's been really bad. It's been very polarizing, I think, for me.
The draft is where I feel like, and again, not to say I've had good games as well. They're usually when I'm playing blue control decks because I feel like my decisions are the most pivotal in that. Like, I think the decisions get compounded with the white board presence decks, as they often do with aggressive decks. And I've certainly punted my fair share of sequencing there. And I think the green ramp decks are largely just like tap out as much as you can, like use your mana the most efficiently every turn, which I don't, that's the style of Magic I feel the most confident in. So it's also the least interesting to me. But I think because Soup is one of the pillars of the format, these multicolor good stuff decks, and just the multicolor nature of the format, signals I think are hard to read. Obviously, they're going to be hard to read because pick orders have not coalesced yet. Carving your lane is important, or I think another way to say it is what you've been saying, which is like drafting a focused deck with a plan is more important. Individual card evaluation is extremely important. And then there's balancing deck construction while you're drafting, like knowing, like what I said, when to pick a land, or when to pick a removal spell, or when to pick a piece of fixing, or when to pick a piece of ramp, or this bomb. Like all of that stuff, I think I have found to be where the most interesting decisions have come.
I want to push back on Soup being one of the pillars of the format a little bit and just see what your thoughts are. I feel like that was the thought I had going into it, and I think advertising it that way led to me drafting 4 and 5 color decks that weren't good enough too often. Like, I have recently set the bar for myself on, like, I have to have a bomb, either like pack 1 pick 1 or pack 1 pick 2 or something, before I start steering towards Soup. Like, whereas previously I just like it was so hard for me to not end up there because I was like, well, all the decks are going to be soupy. We're all just trying to get as much power as we can. But I truly think you want to have one of the top end bombs in the format to start before you go down that route. And if that's the case, I think it should be a little more sparingly.
It's certainly more sparingly than probably you or I were doing at the start of this format, and what we perhaps misled our listeners to do at the start of the format. I agree with that. The thing I want to push back on is, so sure, if you're not taking bombs, a lot of the things that I think you are excited to take are removal spells. Like,
That's fair, yeah.
and I think those removal spells go best in, or go the worst in aggressive decks. And so I don't like, I guess I'm wondering, okay, so if you're not doing that, what are you steering into? Like, and I think it's fine if you're like, I'm steering into Mardu and I am fine to take Shock Brigade, which I think is excellent, but also goes like ninth pick sometimes. And so I don't really feel like I want to start draft. Okay, I don't see a bomb. I'm going to take Shock Brigade first and draft Boros.
But the thing that's where I'm at now, and the thing that does, like taking Shock Brigade first, lets you end up in aggro more consistently and more frequently, which I think it's a really good place. And I have not played best of 3 yet. I plan to play best of 3 this week because I feel like I'm comfortable in best of 1 now. But I think in best of 1, picking that Shock Brigade highly like that lets you steer towards aggro. Like, it just provides clarity really early on. Whereas, like you said, if like that was the question I kept coming to. I knew Boros was good, but I was like, how am I supposed to end up here? Like, I'm just picking terrible cards and praying, but they're not actually that bad. And when you put them all together, they are very synergistic in that you get your opponent dead really effectively.
Yeah, I've seen both sides. Like, I've had success with aggro, and I've also had them play a single lifelinking creature, and I don't have a removal spell in my hand, and I lose.
But that's where I think you can steer into it. Like with the removal spells, you're like, well, you're taking removal. Molten Exhale is great in red-white, or the O-Ring is great in red-white.
Sure, I agree. And I think it's fine that we're doing different things. I just want to draft of the, what I really see is 3 buckets, because I haven't done green mid-range that much. Of those 3 buckets, I want to draft green ramp or blue control more than I want to draft white or red-based aggro. And so
I agree. And I think I'm
going to steer into those decks more personally.
Sure. That's fair. Like, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I think, I guess what I'm trying to put out in the world, because I don't feel like one of us is championing aggro that much usually on the podcast. Yeah. Like, I truly am, and I think it's the best of the bunch because I don't necessarily assume that it loses to mid range as hard. Like, I think the green decks, the mid range decks, still play some tap lands, and the curve outs, like, I think it's fast enough to beat everything. Whereas I think those other 2 decks are at danger of losing to aggro and danger of decks to going over the top of them. So I think, for my money, that's why I'm team aggro. But I think I do agree that it's all there, and you're gonna have to pick ways that you want to steer.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that has consistently surprised me about piloting aggro decks, or I should just say Mardu decks this week, is I get a sinking feeling in so many games on turn 3 or turn 4 where I go, oh, cool, I can't win this game because I haven't played a 2-drop, or they played something that gained life, or whatever. They countered a key 2-drop I was banking on. But then those decks surprise the heck out of me, and I end up winning game. I've won many games this week with Mardu decks that I would have written off turn 4. If you had asked me, what's your betting side? I would have lost money on myself game after game. Yeah. So I will say they have a bit more play to them than that, but there are definitely times where I'm like, oh, you played Sagu Wildling. I lose. You played a 5-mana 3/3 gain 3 on curve with like whatever else you did before then, and it's just hard to punch through that.
Okay.
I've experienced it both ways.
Yeah.
Any thoughts that you want to touch on before we get to chatting about White Beatdown?
Yeah, just lots of questions. How are you building your control decks? Because like I said, I've done it, and I've done ones that I think are pretty good, but that have run into issues. Like, these are the issues I've run into, and I want to see if you have experienced any of these same issues, or if I've just been unlucky or whatever. Like, and you can vouch for this. I've just been sending you screenshots of deck lists. Like, does this deck look good to you? Because I was so lost, I just couldn't even tell anymore. I have found issues with control decks that are like decks that are counter magic, removal, card advantage, and then a couple big threats at the top end, like that you're planning to protect with your counter magic. That style of deck hasn't gone well for me because, like I said, like sometimes you just have the wrong mix of cards against the ramp decks. But I've also, those decks don't play to the board as much, and then your opponent, there is so much removal that your opponent often has 2-3 removal spells to aim at the threat that you need to protect? Like, what's your control stuff look like?
I feel like that is a really hard question to answer in the abstract. I just sent you a link to a Jeskai control deck that I trophied with this week. It plays to the board a bit more than you're probably saying. It does have 2 Jeskai devotees in the 2-drop slot. It doesn't have a lot of power. It has, I think, 1 rare or 2 rares. It has Ambling Stormshell, 5 mana, 5/9, Ward 2. When it taps or when it attacks you, put 3 stun counters on it and draw 3. And it's got Quarry Mountain Monastery, the red land that lets you sort of exile the top card of your library and play it until the end of your next turn. But the rest of it is sort of what I see as the deck of like defensive speed, card advantage. Quarry Mountain Stalwart is a card I wanted to shout out. The 1 red white 3/3 with Flurry, deal 2 to your opponent and gain 2. That, like, I think that's like definitely good in aggro too, but really good in control. Like the gain 2 off of that in control decks is great. Like turn 4 going Quarry Mountain Stalwart into Unending Whisper to gain 2 and draw is nice. But like, I don't know. It's got the things: card advantage, removal, defensive speed, rinse, repeat.
Couple of things here. One,
Okay.
I've never seen this mana evaluation feature of 17 lands. Have you seen this before? It's grading us on our mana bases now.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
Whatever.
kind of cool. Your mana gets a B.
Yeah. Great.
A couple cards in here that I don't like. I'm really off Jadecast Sentinel. Do you still like that card?
I don't
Which
like
is
it
the
as
4
much.
mana 1/5 reach, and you can pay 2 mana tap to put a card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library.
I was worried about decking in this deck and not having win cons. And I know many people have pointed out to us, like, why do you like that card when you can just put, there are some omens, like the white common omen just makes a 2/2 and shuffles back in. But like, yes, but that might, like a 2/2 every turn may not win you the game on turn 20. And Jadecast Sentinel shuffling in relevant spells will win you that game. I also just think, like, what I said about it before of like, it's a 4 mana 1/5 reach. It blocks everything. Bounces off 4/4s. I don't know. I was happy with it in this deck.
Okay. Another card I see here that I have moved down my pick order quite a bit is Narset's Rebuke, which is the 4 and a red instant, deal 5, add Jeskai. That and Focus the Mind. Where are you at on those 2 cards? Focus the Mind is also the 5 mana draw 3 that then costs 2 and a blue if you've cast another spell that turn.
I've cut similarly with my sort of all my blue cards. Like Focus the Mind, I was putting in my blue-green decks that were green-based and just feeling horrible about it, and then have since shifted that. I still think the draw 3s are really important in the blue control decks, and I think Narset's Rebuke is also really important. So I don't know. I'm not that much lower on either of those cards than I was last week.
Interesting. Like, I think I'm lower on them because they're more expensive. Like that if that's your lane, you're probably going to get copies. I think I was picking them too highly. Not that I think they're maybe less good than I thought they were, but I moved them down in my pick order, I think. Mm-hmm. Like, I still think they're similarly powered, but I just have valued ending up with 2 and 3 mana plays more. And I agree. The thing that this deck does that a lot of my control decks didn't do was play the board on turns 2 and turns 3.
Yeah.
But to me, that's not control so much. That's defensive speed. But also, I'm wondering how the heck this deck won games, looking at it. Like, I see that this 7-0'd, and there's not much that's impressive about this deck.
I agree. I mean, the games had a lot of play to them, but it won with Quarry Mountain Stalwart Drains. It won by making 1/1 flyers with Wingblade Disciple. I don't know. My criticism for you about your definition of control decks is you think it means draw go. And control deck just means the longer the game goes, the more likely I am to win. That's what a control deck means. It doesn't mean land pass. So you can play a 2-drop, you can play a 3-drop and still be a control deck. I just want to clarify that.
Yes, I'm taking the note. Note's been received. I think that's a good note for me. Okay. Next is there a definite difference between control and ramp for you? And it sounds like there is. And there wasn't for me. And I think I was getting mixed up a lot in this sauce. Where are you at on valuing Roamer's Routine, which is the green, search up a land, put it on the battlefield tapped with Harmonize for 4 and a green, and Dragonstorm Globe? Where are you at on valuing those 2 cards, and what do your ramp decks look like? Because I think that is a style of deck I hate building that is actually pretty good in this format, which is another place I think, building decks incorrectly.
I am not very high on either Roamer's Routine or Dragonstorm Globe. I don't think jumping from 3 to 5 is that important. I still like the Dragonstorm Forecaster package. Like if I have like playing Forecaster and a couple globes, again, if I'm checking all of the other boxes, like I'm playing, I've got the 2 mana exhales that I can hold up at instant speed with my Dragonstorm Forecaster activation. I want to splash. I have a good number of dragons that the globe will add counters to. Like, I'm checking all those boxes, I'll include them. And not to say that I will like leave them on the sidelines necessarily, but they're not high in my pick orders. They are currently fairly replacement level. Like, to give you an example, I like the monuments much, much more than I like Roamer's Routine and Dragonstorm Globe.
I agree they're not high in my pick order. I keep having trouble against them though. Like the have you not played games in the format that go like your opponent goes land go, tap land go, tap land go, turn 3 they tap out for a Roamer's Routine or a Dragonstorm Globe, and you haven't played to the board? I guess that's where I keep getting myself in trouble. And I have made that adjustment, but I keep playing those style of decks where they haven't played to the board and my hand is all interaction and then expensive spells I can't cast. And like I'm ready to do things in the early turns if my opponent is doing things in the early turns. But because they aren't doing things in the early turns, my deck just ends up looking insanely clunky. And then they stick a Karakik Guardian or something, and my removal's all dead against that. And then they just end up having better cards than me.
Well, only half of if we think these 4 buckets exist, whiteboard presence, green midrange, green ramp, blue control, only 2 of those 4 things are decks you want to have a pile of removal against on turn 2. Because if you're playing against green ramp or blue control, you don't want to kill anything in those early turns. And even sometimes against green midrange, you're like, I don't really want to kill this Einok Wayfarer.
I agree.
So I'm just saying, like, so the decks you're describing, I'm like, where are your counter spells in this hand? Why is your hand all Molten
sometimes
Exhale
you don't
and
like how many
Exhale?
counter spells are you packing in your deck? Like, I mean, so okay, let's say I have
3?
4 counter spells and 4 removal spells or 5 removal spells. Sometimes you don't draw your 4 counter spells or whatever, you know? Or
that's true.
Like you counter their 1 Karakik Guardian and then they have a second. And
I mean, I can't account for every situation of why you're losing, but I can.
Sure. I'm not asking you to. I just, it sounds like you haven't done that. And I've had that experience many times. And I think that's a leak because I wasn't playing to the board early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess that I'm just trying to articulate.
Word. Yeah.
I'm not trying to ask you to solve my problems. I guess I'm just trying to pose the questions and then like see what you think and tell you what I think I've figured out to try to help listeners who maybe are doing the same things wrong that I'm doing wrong.
I totally co-sign that. I think the playing to the board, like I still think the exhales are great and they are like the premium 2-drops in the format for me. But the situation you're describing has come up for me. It hasn't perhaps maybe come up as much where I've had those like awkward matchups of draws with what I have versus what my opponent is doing. But I agree with you. Like playing to the board a bit more. It's sort of why I like the monument, because it lets you do something on turn 2 to progress your game plan if your opponent isn't, putting a creature on board.
Well, I think so. That was one of my big takeaways from last week's episode when you were talking about like moving Einok Wayfarer down, and I wasn't quite there yet last week. And I was like, well, what are you doing on turn 2? And then I was like, well, okay, I guess it's the exhales. Like you want to be interactive with your early stuff. And so that was a takeaway for me. And so I have tried really, like the exhales are great. And I know the exhales are good. And the data has shown that the exhales are good. And I hadn't even looked, but you kind of know what the data says as a content creator, even without looking at it, just because so many people are talking about it. But then I just kept losing. But I think the step I was missing is you want to surround the exhales with still like good 2 and 3 mana board affecting plays.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit, in the thought of going into drafts with a plan, or drafting with a plan as opposed to more than drafting a color per se. One of the philosophical thoughts I was having is I feel like I understand what winning archetypes look like more now. And is drafting more about just knowing what those archetypes look like and steering towards them?
I think so, because if I tell you that Temur is really good, that doesn't let you know anything really.
Because right, I played a bunch of Temur and lost a bunch with Temur this last week.
So I agree with you. I think it's less important to know like what's the best wedge or whatever. It's like, okay, I think Temur cards are great, but what that means is very different if you are approaching it from the blue side or the green side, and you're basically never approaching it from the red side. Like that's a lot. There's a lot baked into I like Temur cards. Similarly, I think you could make the same case for Mardu or Abzan, whatever. If you're talking about these wedges, it's very much decoupled from what the wedge's mechanic is, and there's so many different flavors depending on what angle you're going at it, you know?
So, broader question for you, because I think we were right about a lot last week. Do you still think the format is slow?
I don't know. I'm not aggro pilled. I'll tell you. And
I agree. It's not a trick question. Like
okay.
I assumed your answer was going to be yes.
I still think it's a slow. I don't think it's Ether Drift levels of slow. Like we said, it may be even slower than Ether Drift. I don't think it's that, but because the mobilized decks do pack a punch, but they also can just get completely shut down. So, and I think the late game is real for the control decks and the ramp decks. That I would describe the format as slow, personally.
Yeah, I think I would ish as well, but I think what you said is accurate. I think we might have oversold it last week, and I think I believed what we oversold to the point where I was like, well, I'm just going to draft all interaction early and all like cool threat cards late. Like to me, that's what slow format says. And I think maybe that's where I got so tripped up, is that like you do still really want to try to play relevant cards to the board in the early turns.
I think one of the things that we missed in individual cards is the devotees are pretty darn good, and we haven't talked about them. They? I think they are. So, and I think
the Mardu one is great. I'm in on Mardu devotee for sure.
The one I think is terrible. The blue one is terrible. The Temur devotee is, I still think, is terrible. 2 mana 3/3
defender, or 2 mana 3/3 defender is never going to be good. I'm out for the rest of time.
I would say with an asterisk of if they give it away to attack, maybe. Like sometimes those versions are good, where like when whatever the eerie trigger or whatever trigger you can get to make it attack, maybe. But when it just stone cold has defender, no, because sure that's good against aggro, but it's a stone cold blank against ramp decks and control decks that I'm out on it. Everything else I basically like it, and with the caveat of if you're playing all three colors. I think Mardu Devotee, the one drop, there's just so few one drops in the format. It does a nice like little hand smoothing thing, and those Boros decks, as we'll talk about in just a second, they have a way to utilize that body later in the game, whether it's just with a go wide payoff, whether it's with chump attack with it, and then I use a trick to pump it, whatever. They have ways to utilize that body later in the game. The Sultai Devotee, 2 mana 2/1 Death Touch is just good in green. That's a nice little, it's relevant later in the game against big bodies, relevant early in the game against aggro. Cool. Abzan Devotee, there's a lot of ways to use a sacrifice effect. Like worthy costs get better when you play Abzan Devotee. It's really, I had it in a Sultai deck with Kishla Skimmer, which was really cool, where when it goes to the yard and then you pay 3 to get it out of the yard, and that triggers your Kishla Skimmer. Just found Abzan Devotee to be annoying enough and versatile enough. And the Jeskai Devotee, I think, is good in aggressive decks and good in those control decks, as I'm going to play to the board, and the more I'm wonky my mana base is, or if I've got a Jeskai 3-drop in there, like the Rare Saga or something, it can help me cast that on curve. Yeah, I think I'm in for all the devotees except the Temur one.
Okay.
All right, let's chat white aggro decks. And I'm curious to hear, like I put some thoughts down. I'm curious to hear where you are now that I feel like feels like this deck has some clarity for you. My experience with and against this deck is that it's at its best when it plays tons of creatures that make multiple bodies that are individually quite mopey, which then in turn puts a pinch on your opponent's removal, intended for more premium cards. You know, if you're playing, I mean, I guess Shock Brigade is, you kill that on sight if you can, but you know, something like the white 2 mana 1/2 with Endure 1, you're like, oh, God, I'm not spending a removal spell on either of these things. And if you're building the deck correctly, then you have go wide payoffs, of which there's not quite enough, but you have to sort of lump in the ones that are like, give 2 things +2/+1 or +2/+2. And it kind of does enough, especially if you're able to deploy 2+ of those effects in a game, you'll probably often win by leveraging your board plus those tricks.
Yeah, I agree. There's also just great threats too, without going wide, or threats that do help you go wide. Like some of the premium cards plus removal is just enough to get the job done too.
And the other thing this deck gets to do is plays 1-drops that the other colors don't, right? At uncommon, you get Fleeting Effigy, the single red 2/2 haste that you have to pick up every turn, and Descendant of Storms, the single white 2/1. When it attacks, pay 1 and a white to endure 1. They really take advantage of people going tap land on 1, monument on 2. If you get those going, you can take a chunk of your opponent's life total out, and then really, like, you may not even need the go wide payoffs. You're just doing what you're talking about, which is I leverage my removal because you were setting up your mana in those early turns.
Right.
There's a lot of go wide payoffs. I want to shout out just a few that I think are the best, which are in red. Shocking Sharpshooter, the 1 in a red, 1/3 reach. Whenever another creature you control enters, this deals 1 damage to target opponent. This might be my favorite non-rare card to get into the aggro decks for. Like this, it's this or War Effort, I think, are just incredible. War Effort's the 3 in a red enchantment. Gives all your creatures +1/+0, and whenever you attack, you make tapped and attacking 1/1, and then sack at end of turn. Like, those are just incredible.
Yeah, they're also very nice in tandem with each other. Another card I've been super impressed with is Zurgo's Vanguard, 2 in a red for the star 3 mobilized 1s. Powers equal to the number of creatures you control. This can hit, like, this is the threat plus removal. Like, this can hit for 6, 5. Like, it just hits for huge chunks of damage if your opponent doesn't have a blocker. And a lot of times
Totally.
those decks, you can keep them off balance enough to where they don't if you're playing a late game deck.
Right. Well, and even if they do have a blocker, I mean, they have to call, but like, if I have a 3/3 and you attack with your Vanguard into it, I just go, oh no. Like, what of your 12 combat tricks do you have to mess with this?
Sure.
There's also like ways to take advantage. Go wide payoffs can also be, like I said, there's the red +2/+1 to 2 things. There's the white +2/+2 to 2 things. There's Bearer of Glory, which you can pay 4 and a white to anthem your team. There's things like Rebellious Strike, the +3/+0 draw card trick, or Unsparing Boltcaster that finishes off something, right? That's the 2 in a red, 3/3 when it enters. It deals 3 damage, or deals 5 damage to a thing that was dealt damage this turn. So when you're just like flunging every turn and your opponent is like, block this mobilize token or block your Mardu Devotee, and then you finish it off with a Boltcaster, it's really, really good.
Yeah, I would say Vanguard, War Effort, Sharpshooter on this list. Like, and all 3 of those are red. That's why I was saying I almost like it as base red more than base white. Like, I think, or more that the key cards for the deck are red than they are white in some senses.
Yeah, and Shock Brigade is just such an amazing common for the deck too.
Correct. Yeah. So I almost think base red is better than base white. And the other thing that I haven't gotten a chance to do yet, because I've always paired it with white because it's been open for now, but I think if you get that red package, you can almost surround it with any other color to complement it. Like, you can surround it with blue for tempo, you can surround it for black for removal or sacrifice stuff, that sort of thing. I saw you had Sidisi, that rare we poo-pooed in our Lords Unlimited episode. That's the 1 in a black 1/3 that birthing pods you, or not birthing pods, it recurring nightmares you for a thing with this 1+ mana value. You sack a thing and then bring something back 1 mana value higher. That plays really well with a lot of the red cards.
Yes.
A card that's been super impressive for the red decks is the 2 in a red 1/2 that makes a 1/1.
Yeah. Underfoot Underlings.
Underfoot Underlings. That card's been great for red decks, and that plays super well with Sidisi. So I see a lot of stuff there that if you end up base red, other decks that I want to explore too.
Yes, I agree with you. I think Samp posted in the Discord, he trophied with a Gruul deck that was base red-green, and he's been sort of eyeing that a while. But I agree with you that red as a core can draw on other things, and red has a lot to like. We've really already shouted out the individual overperformers that I have liked a lot: Mardu Devotee, Shock Brigade, and then you just shouted out Underfoot Underdogs. Excuse me, I think I said Underlings earlier, but like, that card is a house, like, just randomly, again, does the thing where it's like, I don't want to spend a removal spell on this because it's 2 mopey creatures. But then a lot of the mobilized things you get to sneak through. Like, if you have Zurgo in your deck, you're just like, here's Zurgo attacking unblocked, and then here's 2 mobilized things that aren't going to die if you don't jump in front of them or whatever. Or it just helps you get the last 2, 4, 6 chunks of damage in. You have a way to pump the thing after you make it unblockable. Underdogs does a lot.
You have Starry-Eyed Skyrider as an underperformer on this. This is 2 and a white for 1/3 flyer. When it attacks, another target creature you control gains flying until end of turn, and then attacking tokens you control have flying. This has been really impressive to me. For the play pattern of it also jumps another thing in the air, not just your tokens. So you can jump like a mobilized creature in the air, and then all the mobilized things it poops out are flying, plus your other mobilized stuff. I think this card pushes a lot of damage.
I think the more aggressively slanted my deck is, the less interested I am in this card, is my take currently. Like, the more aggressive I am, the less I want a 3-mana 1/3. The more mid-rangey, Mardu-y I am, the more I like this card. Like, this plus the Mardu 4/4 Bone Cairn Butcher, the 4/4 mobilize 2 attacking tokens have Death Touch. Like, this launches, with that, launches 7 in the air when they both attack. That's an incredible chunk. But I don't really want to play either of those cards. I don't care about either of those cards in my more streamlined Boros aggro decks. Is perhaps
I don't think you've launched Zergo's Vanguard into the air yet. Then
I haven't launched Zergo's
that card
Vanguard
hits
yet.
like a truck with Starlight Skyrider.
That's fair. Maybe I'm too low. Maybe this is going to be a ping-ponging take, but I have not, when I've drafted aggro, I have not really wanted to pick it. And when I've put it in my decks, I've not loved deploying it. I just not feel like it packs enough of a punch.
Okay.
And the other card I think is not great is Devoted Duelist, the 1 in red 2/1 with haste and flurry trigger deals damage to your opponent. I think 2/1 is just a pretty atrocious stat line in the format. There's a lot of 1/3s running around.
Yeah, I agree. Cards, I want it to do something. I'm worried that it will not ever do something. I have not had to stoop that low yet, and I've been eyeing, like, am I going to be willing to put this in my deck? And I think the answer is probably, hopefully not.
I'm also, like, I am a little dubious of Boros. This is partially because of my own sort of feast or famine experiences with the decks. The Beers SC, who's an excellent drafter, sort of omnipresent in a lot of Twitch streams, he was really Boros pilled. And so I was like, hey, can you just like give me some quick hits so I can talk about it on the podcast? He was like, yeah, sure. And then like the next morning he was like, I don't know, I'm kind of losing faith in the deck. Like, I think as people like start to figure out, like, you know, their soup decks are getting more streamlined and less greedy and people are stumbling a little less, I think these decks get a little worse. I still think it's a pillar of the format. It exists, but like I've said, it's not quite where I want to plant my flag. Pick one.
So the other card that we haven't talked about at all that's insane in red white is Frontline Rush. Red white for the instant, choose one, make 2 1/1 goblins, or target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. It's pretty trivially easy for the deck to poop out 7 or 8 creatures, and then you just flunge, and this lava axes your opponent for 8. It's really good. Like, it's on that list of red cards. Like, this should be a draw into the deck for you.
Yes, and this is on my long list of go wide payoffs, because that's really what it is. Like, sure, you can make some 1/1s with it, but you're hoping that it's 2 mana deal 8 to your opponent.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that take. Let's chat about just a few individual cards before we go here. I think Snakeskin Veil is one of the most important cards for green ramp decks, and I guess I would assume also for green mid-range decks, though, like I said, I don't have much experience there, but Snakeskin Veil for the ramp decks is just MVP so much.
I agree. I love this card. I cannot tell you the number of times I've like played my thing, held up Snakeskin Veil, held up Interaction, and my opponent has the double removal spell for it. But I think that's been a symptom of, I agree, sometimes unlucky, but also a broader symptom of I've not been playing to the board enough earlier to force them to use their removal spells. So I agree. This card's good.
Kishla Trawlers, I think, is great too. 2 and a blue, 3/2. When it enters, you can exile a creature from your yard. When you do, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And this is great in the blue control decks, and probably it's also just great in any blue deck. Maybe even better in like teamer ramp decks that are base green, because your creature count is a little higher. The danger I've seen with this card is your creature count is too low in a blue deck to consistently trigger this, but I think your creature count shouldn't be that low. Like, you shouldn't be running 6 creatures in your blue control decks.
I agree this card's good, but I think it's egregious that this and that Jeskai thing that picks up instants and sorceries are in a format with Jeskai Revelation and Inspired Ultimatum. I think it's gross. Like, I think it's egregious that those things are possible to do in the format on a very consistent basis.
Let's get the what grinds my gears segment of 50 takes going now. Let's
locked and loaded, baby. That the stupid Sultai Wrath that blows up
Oh
everything,
my god, yeah.
and Meringue River Regent. Like, I'm so over all of those cards already.
Yeah. This is like I have basically seen those cards. You've seen those cards for both of us. Like I have not played against those cards that much this week. And so I think that's also what's happening. We're getting like a Duskmorn thing where I'm like, all I'm opening is ley lines, and you're like, all I'm opening is bombs, like so it's just sample sizes are small even when you're drafting a ton.
Yeah.
Snowmelt Stag. The thaw is coming. The melt is coming for this card. It's a lot more replacement level than we said last week. I have a fondness for this card, but I don't think it's format defining by any means.
No, you don't care if this card is in your deck or not.
We've shouted out, we've appraised and praised Sib-Sig Appraiser. And I'm sure if you have sniffed 17 lands this week, you've seen that this card is top of the heap of the commons by quite a bit. I'm still kind of surprised by it, but I've wrapped my head around it with I just never want to miss land drops. Sib-Sig Appraiser are also really nice with Kishla Trawlers to get a creature in your yard, perhaps incidentally. But Sib-Sig Appraiser it does enough of little things that it's good.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing that you were already doing that I once I started valuing this higher is it gets you on board. That's just I cannot. That's the biggest place I went wrong in the format was my curve was too high and I wasn't playing to the board enough.
Some cards I haven't had experience with, but have witnessed or seen folks talking about in the Discord: Aggressive Negotiations, 2 and a black sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. I haven't done much Golgari midrange, but I have heard good things about this card there, and I believe it because, again, against green ramp decks and blue control decks, this card is good.
Yes, it forces a counterspell to their hand, or you nab their big threat.
Right. Did you see this in the Discord? Fyodor Sasha trophied with a deck with double Breaching Dragonstorm. It's the 4 and a red enchantment. When it enters, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile something with mana value 8 or less, or an on-land card, and if it's MV 8 or less, you can cast it, and then when a dragon enters, you pick this up. He was like, I just played this and he just took a bunch of Dragon Omens, because all of his, like, air quote 5 and 6 drops had 2 mana buyouts, so then he was just getting to, literally do Dragonstorm with this, like, cast this, get a dragon, pick it up immediately, and I was like, oh, okay. Seems like a cool thing to do. I had sort of written this card off.
It's like the Ethan Sachs Kruger companion workaround.
Yes, exactly. Ooh.
Secret twos, baby. Secret
twos. I love that. Yes.
I have not seen it, but this brings up a broader question for me. Where are those common dragons at in your pick order? Because I've moved them up significantly, and I still don't end up with them as often as I want to. So I guess I just need to keep moving them up. But also, I have moved the red one up enough. Like, I think the red one, I love the red dragon. It's just Volcanic Dragon for 5 mana. It's really good.
It's especially good in the aggressive decks.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like as a curve topper, but it also makes sure you don't flood. It does everything you want in red white. Fully in on the red one, and I have it appropriately highly enough that I end up with it now. The black one, I'm always like, I want to take it, but I feel like I never can, and then I never end up with it, and I keep losing to it. Same thing with the blue one. Where are they at in your pick order?
They're not that high. The Sagu Wildling, the green one, is still very high for me. One of my top green commons, if not still, I think probably still my top green common.
You're picking that over lands.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But the blue one,
that was an adjustment I've made.
I've had to face the blue dragon versus Dispelling Exhale a lot, and I usually land on the side of Dispelling Exhale. Like, I certainly want my first Dispelling Exhale over the first blue dragon.
I agree. Yeah. Okay.
The black one I don't care about that much. The red one, I'm not really taking them that highly, I don't think. I don't know.
Okay. But do you end up with them?
Yeah. It's basically a product of, am I starting to draft a deck that needs them? Like, do I need because sometimes your exhales need them. The blue exhales need them. Like, that's really the place where I feel like really want to make sure my dragon count is around at least 4 for these, But the blue exhales is really the only thing. I haven't done any dragon storming yet. So I care about dragons a lot less in my decks.
So have you played against Dragonstorm Globe Dragons?
No, not yet.
It's been impressive. Like the globe into the common dragons, making them enter with +1/+1 counters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if your opponent goes, Dragonstorm Globe into Dragonstorm Globe into dragons. Like all of a sudden they're all like
5/5s,
gigantic, and
yeah.
you have to have the hard removal to deal with
Yeah.
them, like your Osseous Exhales or your Dispel, like not Dispelling, I don't know the names, the white one and the
Molten.
black one and
Yeah.
the red one. Like they don't cut it anymore. Like you got to have the O
True.
rings and the black 5-mana thing. Like I've been pretty impressed with that. That's on my radar too. I've lost that several times.
Yeah, I'd buy it. Shout out Quarry Mountain Stalwart again, the Boros 3-drop with Flurry, Drain 2. I think this card is excellent. Like excellent in aggro and excellent in control. Probably even more so excellent in control because the life gain matters there.
Talk to me about excellent. Better or worse than Molten Exhale?
But maybe better. Depends. Like you need removal in those decks, so it's tough. You need removal more than you need Quarry Mountain Stalwart. Quarry Mountain Stalwart is more unique than Molten Exhale.
But worse than Frontline Rush, right?
For aggro, yes.
Okay. But more versatile. Yeah. Okay.
More versatile, yeah.
So pack one, pick one. Are you taking Quarry Mountain Stalwart or Frontline Rush?
I'm going to take Quarry Mountain Stalwart because of where I want to end up.
Right. I think I'm going to take Frontline Rush. It's interesting.
Which is fine. Unending Whisper. This is the single blue draw card. Harmonize 5 and a blue. If you care about Flurry at all, this is your card. I also had a cool that stupid Jeskai bird, the like Jeskai 2 Brid 2/3 Flying Vigi. When it enters, you can take an instant or sorcery from your graveyard.
I hate that card. I loathe that card.
On top of your library. I found a really interesting play pattern with like Unending Whisper makes that card better because it gives you the chance to, like, I had lots of times where I would go bird, top and exhale, draw it with Whisper, cast the exhale. Like it lets you draw the card immediately. And it's just not like plays well with Sibsig Appraiser, like Unending Whispers in my base blue decks. I want like 2 copies. I like that card a lot.
I think this is something I've shifted also. This card is a higher pick than Focus the Mind, correct?
Ooh, yeah, probably. Yeah, because I want multiples of this and I don't really want multiples of Focus the Mind, and I would rather have Blizzard Brawl than Focus the Mind.
You mean Bewildering Blizzard?
Yeah, no, I mean the green fight spell from Kaldheim.
Got him, folks.
Yes, I mean Bewildering Blizzard.
Yeah, that's another shift I made that I think where I was wrong. But it's wild how being wrong on like 10 cards and the lands and then just not being quite willing to play to the board enough led to me losing infinitely despite having most of the format right in my brain. Just wild.
Yeah.
Next up, Dusyat Earthcarver. We were way too high on this card. This is 5 and a green, 4/4 reach. When it enters, it endures 3. This is what we thought. It's whatever.
Is it slightly better than whatever or no?
No. I do not care if my deck has a Dusyat Earthcarver in it at the end of the draft or not.
Okay.
There's nowhere close.
What a ping pong.
Yeah.
What a ping
pong. We're all
pong.
about here on Lords of Limited. We got to bait people with the wrong advice so that we can win, and then, then we'll let them in the next week. Next up, Sarkhan's Resolve. 1 and a green for an instant. Choose one target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn, or destroy target creature with flying. This, I was way too low on. This card is excellent, and it's a way that the green decks get to kill flyers without question, and double spell. Like this card being 2 mana is huge.
Yeah, I agree. I'm playing it for the first time in this like Abzan mid-range deck. I don't know if I want this in my ramp decks though.
That's fair.
You
probably don't want it in your ramp decks, but it is good in green control decks or green decks that are playing the board. Like if you care about maybe wanting +3/+3,
right.
Like the card is excellent.
I agree with that.
Next up, Salt Road Pack Beast, your boy. I'm fully Pack Beast pilled. 5 and a white beast, costs 1 less cast for each creature you control. When it enters, draw a card.
I told you that your take was gonna age poorly.
My take is aged poorly. This is great in the go wide aggro decks for the same reason that Sibsig Appraiser is good for the blue decks. It just keeps things flowing while playing to the board for you. It's nuts in multiples. It's pretty trivially easy to get it to cost 1. It almost always costs 3 or 4 in the base red white decks. It's really good.
My opponent played I was playing a blue control deck. My opponent played the 1 and a white rare 1/3 with Mobilize 2, where you can't cast spells on your opponent's turn, which just completely hosed my whole hand. And then on turn 2 or turn 3, they attacked with that. They mobilized 2, and then they played Pack Beast. And I was like, Well, we could wrap this up right now. This is not going well. Yeah. My opponent has never resolved Pack Beast, and I've gone, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. It's a good card. Similarly, for a card I've never seen be bad, Ice Ridge Serpent. 4 and a blue, 3/3, enters, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. It's almost like one of my podcast co-hosts told me this was going to be a good card.
So
what happened there? There was a lot of emotion on your face.
So I just pulled up 17 lands because I couldn't remember the name of the card, and I wanted to ask your opinion of Ice Ridge Serpent versus another tempo-y looking 5-drop in the format in blue, which is Constrictor Sage. The 4 and a blue, 4/4 when it enters, tap a thing, stun it, and has renew for 2 and a blue to tap a thing, stun it. And so I sorted 17 lands by uncommon blue to look where it was, and it is at the bottom, sorted by game and hand win rate of the blue uncommons, which shocked me. So I was going to ask, what do you think about this card versus Ice Ridge Serpent? And I feel like I have my answer by looking at the numbers and the data. That's pretty astounding.
That's wild to me. I do think I almost like Ice Ridge Serpent better because it makes you recast the card, but they're similarly powerful and they let you leverage tempo in a big way. And I do think there's a real choking point on mana that happens around like turns 5, 6, 7, and 8, where these cards can be pretty backbreaking.
I think I'm kind of sold on, like, I have been wrestling with that in my mind this week and just seeing the numbers, because like in my head, I'm like, Constrictor Sage has to be better. It's a 4/4. It has the renew stuff. It's got to be better. But I have felt consistently underwhelmed by Constrictor Sage, where like the tap a thing, keep a tap for a turn doesn't really solve my problems. And the bonus of Ice Ridge Serpent, like just nuking a token, like it hard answers Mammoth Bellow.
Mammoth Bellow, yeah, I agree.
Right? I don't know. I think Serpent is better than Sage, which was not apparent to me.
That's what I was going to pose to you, and that's where I would have been leaning. I would not have said that Sage was that bad, though.
The worst performing blue uncommon. That's crazy.
That does seem insane to me. Next up, Overwhelming Surge. 2 and a red for an instant. Choose one or both. Deals 3 damage to target creature. Destroy target non-creature artifact. Is this ever not a 2-for-1? It's just always 2-for-1 to me.
Right, but it's like a 2-for-1 that isn't really a 2-for-1 because the monument already got a land.
Nope. It's not the monuments. It's like I have the green rare that like ramps me and gives my things like that card that's great. Like I've been 2-for-1 with that. With like every rare artifact you can imagine that's good. Yeah, like it just has 2-for-1 me every time it's been cast.
Oh,
it's been.
I've only had this. I have not loved when my opponent blows up a monument, but it doesn't feel like a 2-for-1. I agree. Surge has been good. There are lots of non-creature artifacts.
Yeah, so that card's going up for me. And lastly, Dragon Sniper, green for the 1/1 Vigilance Reach Death Touch. I was too low on this card and have since bumped it up once I started valuing shoving my curve lower and the ability to double spell more. And I think this card does everything you want from a defensive card like that.
For sure. It kind of, I guess it still is good enough against the aggro decks, but it's at its best against control decks and ramp decks.
Well, yeah, but it's good against all of them. That's why it's great. Like it's never dead.
It's never dead for sure. So was there any? So it sounds like the biggest adjustment you made this week was thinking about the focusing the decks that you were going into rather than going from card power or build it and they will come for the power.
Or just trying to, I think I was thinking about it as like, okay, well, I'm going to draft a clan, or maybe I'll draft a clan and splash a color, as opposed to like, I'm going to draft aggro, I'm going to draft like a proactive mid-range deck, I'm going to draft a ramp deck, which wasn't even on my radar really as a style of deck to draft, or versus I'm going to draft a control deck. Like, and once I started looking at it as that, rather than looking at it as clans and colors, I think I got a lot more focused because it also let me pick aggro cards better. So that overarchingly, but then the two biggest adjustments were keeping my curve lower, even in later game decks, so that I had more, like my hand wasn't just full of 4 and 5 mana spells on turns 7 and 8, like that I actually could maneuver in the later turns of the games rather than just playing one spell per turn. That, and then playing to the board. I think those are the big adjustments for me.
I like those as takeaways for this episode.
Okay, I want you to look at one quick pack one, pick one here,
Okay.
and see how this checks out to your gut. Pack one, pick one. See the following cards as options. There's a Caustic Exhale as a common, black instant. Target creature gets -3/-3. Costs 1 if you got a dragon. It costs 2 if you don't. There's Karakik Guardian. That's the Temur 6/5 flying vigilance trample. Has hexproof if it hasn't been dealt damage yet. And then there's like a Wingblade Disciple, maybe. 2 in a blue, 2/2 flying flurry. When you cast your second spell, make a 1/1 bird. And then the rare is Revival of the Ancestors. 1 Abzan for the Saga to create 3/1/1 spirit tokens on chapter 1. You get 3 +1/+1 counters on chapter 2, and the creatures you control gain trample and lifelink on chapter 3.
You want to know what I would pick?
I do. I want to know what you would pick and why.
I would pick Karakik Guardian because I think it is power enough for the ramp decks, and I guess also fine top end if I end up in a green based Temur mid-range deck. But I like Karakik Guardian more than I think Caustic Exhale is the other option for me. I'm not particularly interested in taking Revival of the Ancestors over either of those cards. And I would take the dragon there. I think that's rare level of power.
That's what I took also. This is the card that you know how LR always does that award for like card that your opponent, the card that always beats you but that you can never win with in their sunset shows. Like this is that card for me. Like it always crushes me. It's always soul crushing, and then mine are always just kind of whatever, and I end up losing when I cast it. I would still take it here. Like I think it's the right pick over Caustic Exhale, but the shift that has happened for me is that previously I would have been thinking, okay, like I'm going to draft Temur or I'm going to draft 5-color from this point. Like, okay, I've got a great card. I don't think this one's good enough. Like, I think this is my line for like, I'm not willing to just like say I'm going to draft green from this point. Like, I'm looking for a reason to get off this, like a better card with a better plan than this, I think.
What non-rare are you going to see that's better than this?
Any of the red aggro cards. Like, I think that's what I'm looking for, is any of the cards that would push me towards aggro.
You're Camp Mardu, which is fine. Like, it's good that we've got representation for the two factions in the community on the show, but it just means you're more Camp Mardu, I think.
Yes, I think so. But
if you're looking to get off this, why don't you just take Caustic Exhale then? I feel like
I don't think Caustic Exhale is a good aggressive card. Okay. And I think Karakik Guardian's a better late game card than Caustic Exhale. But I got to stop saying control. I think that's where I've tripped myself up the most.
Yes.
Is it like I think Karakik Guardian makes me want to draft a control deck that plays Karakik Guardian as my late game threat, and then I'm going to win the game with my Karakik Guardian. And you're just wanting to like ramp to it and play some other threats alongside Karakik Guardian, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I've gotten myself screwed up so much.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because I think also probably why it sounds like if you're not playing to the board, your Karakik Guardian is less impressive because once it hits, your opponent has a kill spell for it. And you haven't pressured their life total that hitting for 6 matters that much, you know?
Yeah. That's where I've gone wrong.
Yeah.
All right. So hopefully, if you've been struggling in similar ways as I am, this has been helpful for you. And if you haven't been struggling and you're crushing, keep crushing, and you can decide whether you're team. Yes. Yeah. Must be nice to not be stuck in silver. But whether you're Team Boros, let us know whether you're Team Boros or Team Temur, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And on that note, I think great place to wrap us up. Thank you as always to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
You can find all of our content on our website, lordsoflimited.com. We've got an updated tier list.
Updated. I did it this morning. I woke up at 7 this morning to play Magic and update our tier list and get my thoughts down for this episode. And hopefully to have no coughing and less phlegm in the microphone. Usually my podcast regimen is set my alarm clock for 15 minutes before we record, take a quick shower, guzzle some Diet Mountain Dew, and go. And that hasn't been working out lately for the old vocal cords. So I prepped this time.
It's a harrowing peek behind the curtain for our listeners. Tier list on our website, links to our YouTube channel, our Twitch streams, our episode backlog, which we now have a search function. Shout out to one of our listeners for being like, hey, War of the Spark flashback was up last week and it was really hard to find War 50 takes. And I was like, you're right, it is. So now there's a search function on our website if you want to find some old episodes. That's a place to do it. All of that's at lordsoflimited.com.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.